What's up, guys? This is Tim Matthews, also known as harangutang, and today I'm going to bring you a presentation style video about 3-betting from the blinds. So if you've ever been in the small blind or the big blind and you face an open raise, then this video should be able to help you. So what I'm going to cover is my general pre-flop strategy about how I approach 3-betting from the blinds. Now, when I say my general strategy, of course I'm talking about my own approach, and that approach is the one I employ in the games that I play, which are mid-stakes, 6 max, 2-4 to 5-10. But I truly feel that, especially with pre-flop, these strategies are quite robust and they will work quite well in a variety of games. Now, I don't mean that you should apply everything I tell you exactly to any type of game, but I think what you'll learn from this video will be fairly broadly applicable to a number of poker situations. So preflop is definitely something that I think at this stage in online poker's history gets a bit discounted because of how quote-unquote figured out it is, but I don't really agree that it is something that you should discount or feel like you can't improve on, because it really is kind of the cornerstone, as cheesy as it sounds, of the whole hand. Because if you make a mistake pre-flop, it's really only going to become compounded post-flop. You can't kind of make mistakes pre-flop and then just like make up for it in later streets by making some crazy play. Like, it's really a fundamental thing. I mean, I know that there's only 2 cards to look at as opposed to 7 by the river, but there's actually a decent amount of nuance and I would say edge you can gain from working on your pre-flop strategy. And honestly, people make mistakes pre-flop that you would be surprised that they make, and you can really capitalize on that. And there's definitely room for a bit of creative, exploitive play against the right types of opponents. And then there's just good, solid play that will let you hold your own very, very well against other very tough opponents. So definitely, when you're thinking about your game and reviewing your play, do not ignore pre-flop spots that you might be a bit unsure of, and so definitely think about those when you're thinking about your overall game. So first, I'm going to talk just a little bit about sizing, since it's kind of an easy thing to cover. Good to start with. So generally, slightly bigger than if you were in position. For me, that means if someone opens to 3x, then I'm 3-betting to 10x. Someone opens to 2.5x, 3-betting to 9x. And if someone min raises, then I'm making it about 8x. And generally, if someone opens the button with a wide range, then I'll tend to knock all those numbers down by about 1. So I'll usually 3-bet a button open to 7 or maybe 7.5x. because of their wider range. So generally just slightly bigger. This doesn't apply, of course, to small blind versus big blind, which, as I'm sure you can tell, is a slightly unusual situation. It's a bit different than most of what I'm going to be talking about. But I will mention that if the general sizing that people use in the small blind versus the big blind is they tend to open to 3x, and I tend to 3-bet to 8x. Because I'm in position, and against someone opening into me for 3x with a wide range, I feel that 8x is a very strong counter strategy. So those are general sizing guidelines. You can definitely vary those slightly, but I would not vary them too much. And I think there's a reason you rarely see people go much beyond those numbers. And for all those numbers, I'm basing this off of 100 big blind stacks, which is generally what I'm going to be using as my baseline unless I mention otherwise. So keep that in mind. And that kind of leads into point number 2, which is consistent sizing. And this is just kind of good general poker play, is when spots where you are find yourself in quite often, using a consistent sizing is just good general play. It's going to allow you to not give off tells or other additional information, while also giving you a good sense of the different stack to pot ratios and common stack sizes and pot sizes. And it's just going to help breed more familiarity, and it's also going to distract you less by having to pick a sizing every time. So, like, while it is possible, maybe in a theoretical way, that maybe with half your range you should be 3-betting to 7x and then half to 8x. I'm not saying this is something that's true, but if that were the case, even if you knew that, it would actually distract you quite a bit, I would say, by thinking about which hand that falls into, which hand group, and then modifying that sizing for the benefit, which would be still quite minuscule. So sort of pick a sizing and sort of stick with it. Now, of course, if you're playing against a massive fish who never folds, then you should make it bigger. But even then, oftentimes these sizings are going to be pretty effective because they're always going to let you get the money in by the river, and it's easier to pot control anyway against a weaker player most of the time. And so the final point I want to talk about with sizing is appropriate sizing versus shorter stacks. And so if you played online poker in the last few years at just about any stake, you probably noticed there's a lot of 40 big blind multi-tabling rat holers. And these players tend to open to a min raise or 2.5x most of the time. Now, if you've seen them play against each other, they do tend to have the pre-flop game down pretty well for 40 big blind stacks. So you want to be 3-betting pretty small versus them. As you notice, they might notice they do against others. So if they're min raising, then generally I would say 5.5 to 6 big blinds is a good 3-bet sizing, and that's going to prevent them from just jamming over you with a wide range. Because if you're 3-betting to 8 big blinds and they're min raising, then that's just going to be too big, and they're going to just be able to jam over you with quite a wide range. So make it smaller versus those guys, and just generally make it a bit bigger than against regular players when you're in position. One thing also with regards to consistent sizing, I think I talked about this just a little bit in another video, but in the past, not so much now, but more in the past, some people had a tendency to 4-bet larger with ace-king than with their other value hands and their bluffs. I guess they were afraid of getting flatted, so they would just like add a few big blinds to their 4-bet just to like ensure you fold, I guess. And but they would only do it with ace-king, and that's the kind of thing where probably the reason you don't see it anymore is that people kind of caught on. They realize that it's very exploitable. So that's another reason why consistent sizing is going to serve you pretty well. So next I'm going to talk just a little bit about general strategy about reacting to a 4-bet. This is a pretty broad topic, but I thought I would include it for kind of a sake of completeness, just to give you kind of a general overview of how I tend to react to a 4-bet when I'm in the blinds and I made a 3-bet. And the first thing you want to consider is whether you want to have a flatting range or not. And I'll give you just sort of my spoiler alert, is that with 100 big blind stacks, I generally do not have a flatting range against a normal 4-bet sizing against a normal regular. And a lot of regulars don't as well in the spot out of position, so this isn't that atypical, I would say. In fact, I would say it's more common than not. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And when I say normal sizing, I mean, say you 3-bet to 10 big blinds and they 4-bet to 20 big blinds or 22 big blinds, something like that. or you make it 8 big blinds, they make it 16, 17, 18, something like that. Those are fairly normal sizing in today's 100 big blind game.